So maybe I can start.
Academic, but he has moved to government.
So good afternoon, everybody. So I, together with Mark, we are the focal points for this great workshop, which will discuss a very important theme, I think. Let's promote the European vision for digital governance and cooperation in the United Nations. So, as you probably read in the session teaser, this workshop will review the two major initiatives that we have to discuss in the incoming years until 2025. So we have the Global Digital Compact and we have the WSIS Plus 20. So the Global Digital Compact is under discussion for the time being. We'll have a ministerial of the summit preparing the summit next September, where the co-facilitators of the Global Digital Compact will present a issues paper. Again, on the Global Digital Compact, we recently it was published and presented a policy brief. And we have at the same time started the review of the WSIS Plus 20, which should have a high-level meeting in 2025. So we are underway with very important initiatives for the digital world. And we'll have two parts in this workshop. So we are very lucky because we have a very good speakers and very important people during these last 20 years of internet governance. And so we'll have Wolfgang Kleinwachter, who is a professor emeritus for internet policy and regulation at the universities of Aarhus. We'll have Nigel Ekinson that will participate online. He's the head of internet governance in the UK Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. And Chris Buckridge, that is here with us, is a member of the multi-stakeholder advisory group of the IGF. So the three questions for the part one of this workshop are the following. How successful are we in promoting the European vision of multi-stakeholder internet governance and digital cooperation? What specific successes should Europe champion in the WSIS Plus 20 preparatory consultations? How can EuroDIG cooperate with other national and regional IGFs in ensuring recognition of their contributions to the Global Digital Compact development process and to the WSIS Plus 20 review? So very broad questions, but I know that our very knowledgeable speakers will be very straight to the point and will point out the main issues that we have here for the upcoming months. So I will start by the order that we have here. So I'll ask Professor Wolfgang Kleinwachter for 3 minutes presentation of your initial remarks. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for being back in Tampere. I started lecturing 30 years ago, so that means I feel home. When in 1993, Professor Karl Nordenstreng, who was the head of the department here, invited me to teach for 1 year. The world has changed since the 30 years. That was the early days of the internet. I was very proud to have an email address with .fi. And but now when we look towards the Global Digital Compact and the role of Europe, so I would say, Europe has to see itself as part of the global discussion. So well, like EuroDIG is part of the global IGF. So Europe has to contribute to the building of the global institutions. Since the internet revolution started 50 years ago, we have discussed how to constitute the internet, how to build mechanisms. And the outcome we see now is we have achieved a lot in these 50 years. So 20 years ago, we had a World Summit, the Tunis Agenda, we established the IGF. 10 years ago, we had the Net Mundial Declaration. So there is no need to reinvent the wheel. So what we have to do is we have to improve the wheel. And, you know, in the early days, we built bicycles like some older people will remember the Tressin, but now we need a bicycle where we can go to the Tourmalet and to win the Tour de France. So there is no need, you know, to change everything, but to improve what we have. And for the technical world, we have the ICANN, the IRs, and the IETF. And for the internet-related public policy issues, we have the IGF. The IGF was designed as a non-decision-making body. Decisions should be made in mandated organizations on the intergovernmental level, on the business level, on the civil society level. What we have missed in the past was that the discussion layer was a little bit and is a little bit separated from the decision-making layer. So, and that's why the General Secretary of the United Nations, Guterres, said, okay, we have to enhance and strengthen the IGF with an IGF Plus. He has nominated a tech envoy. He has established a leadership panel with good European participation. And so that means we have to go the next step. The Global Digital Compact has to make a contribution to strengthen the IGF. And I think this will be thirdly an issue for the further discussion, because what we have seen on the table are some confusing more proposals. So there is no need, you know, to reproduce what we have already have. So we have to strengthen the institutions we have and to make them better, to make them more efficient. And I see my 3 minutes already over. And so I'm back to
Thank you. So now I'll give the floor to Nigel Higginson. Oh my God, the timer. Nigel Higginson, is he online? I think so. Nigel, can you hear me?
Yes, good
Please go
afternoon.
ahead.
Can you hear me?
Can you, well, maybe you can try again?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah, good.
3 minutes.
Well, yes. 3 minutes. It's like, yeah, countdown. Well, first of all, good afternoon. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but I will be there in person this evening if I ever get my flights after all these delays. But anyway, thank you very much for inviting me onto this panel. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Mark, for coordinating this. So, high-level remarks. Yes, the Global Digital Compact. Do we need it? What will it really fulfill that we're not fulfilling at the moment? And I think the jury is out on this. As Wolfgang has said, there are many institutions working on many different issues. And for the Global Digital Compact to add value, it has to reinforce those institutions. It has to encourage those institutions to do further work in various areas to set out what can be done in terms of sustainability and development, etc. But it shouldn't duplicate the work of those institutions. So clearly, the GDC has got to tread a fine line. I think it's very encouraging that the tech envoy, who I hope will be with us later, and the co-facilitators have really encouraged multi-stakeholder participation in this process, and that is really to be, really to be something that's we appreciate. But of course, the proof is in the pudding. We haven't got the Global Digital Compact yet. We're expecting an issues paper, and clearly that issues paper is going to need to be socialized amongst the multi-stakeholder community. So there's a lot at stake here, and we certainly look forward to cooperation between the IGF in particular and the Global Digital Compact, because it's in terms of the internet governance part of the GDC, it's the IGF that matters. Going on to the WSIS +20 process very briefly, this for many of us was going to be the defining moment of 2025. Given the Global Digital Compact, there is clearly some issues, some concerns about how the two initiatives will play out. What's important for us is that the WSIS Plus 20 process has its own space. This is an important evolution of a process beginning in 2003 and 2005, and we want to see it evolve. We want to see new action lines. We want to see the evolution of the WSIS process. And to do that, it needs its own space. And we want to see a solid endorsement of the incredible journey that we've had since 2006 and the first UN IGF.
I think that we achieved the 3 minutes.
Yep, and we need to also recognize the fantastic contribution that the NRIs have made. I'll stop there. Thank you, Anna.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Nigel. And now over to you, Chris.
Okay,
IGF member.
Thank you very much, Anna. Yeah, I think Wolfgang and Nigel have said a great deal that I agree with here. I think if I go back to the very specific questions that were set by Anna and Mark at the outset here, they frame it quite in an interesting way. I think when we say how successful are we in promoting the European vision of a multi-stakeholder internet governance and digital cooperation, that's a very loaded question. And I think it's particularly loaded because what is that European vision? I think there has been a lot of work done. I think the EU has engaged really actively in things like they had the European Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles for the Digital Decade. So that documentation and that thought has gone in there. How consistently that has been reflected in even what the EU does in a policy way is, well, less consistent. And I think that's worth noting. It's a lot of the discussions that we have at EuroDIG and in other venues about is other proposals and is the legislation that we see hewing to those principles that have been laid out by the Parliament and by others. But I think the discussion about the GDC and the discussion about WSIS and bringing this to the UN really emphasizes how important it is to be consistent, to walk the walk. When we say, a multi-stakeholder internet, maintaining an unfragmented global internet, the EU institutions need to be reflecting that in the actual legislation and the regulation that they make. In terms of specific successes that Europe should champion, I think one really important point, and this is coming from the technical community and looking at the sort of public core, the core functions of the internet, the fact that governance has not crumbled in the last few years under the sort of extreme pressures of things like the Ukraine situation, the invasion there, but actually has maintained. So we still have a global internet, still based around certain core functions, standards, governance structures that we all agree on, and that are being successfully managed according to multi-stakeholder principles. So that in itself has been, an unexpected and in some ways unwelcome stress test on the system, but it's a stress test that the system has passed, and we need to take that very positive message about a multi-stakeholder approach into these discussions. And finally, how can EuroDIG cooperate with NRIs to contribute here? I think one thing we've seen, and EuroDIG has really led the way on among the NRIs, and it's now also in the IGF, is this sort of idea of making very clear messages coming out of an event. I think a non-decision-making event where there is just a conversation is very valuable, but you need to have something that takes the conversation forward beyond that event. And if we look at what's going on, okay, 30 seconds more.
Yes.
If we look at what's going on with, the Global Digital Compact from the IGF MAG, we've made a proposal now to the co-facilitators of that Global Digital Compact, the Swedish and Rwandan representatives, for a multi-stakeholder sounding board. And so this is trying to make sure that Global Digital Compact process actually has a multi-stakeholder element there. Now, we don't know whether that will be accepted or how that will move forward. But what's really clear is that if we can get that multi-stakeholder foot in the door, in a sense, for this process, we're going to need clear messages, clear input from the global multi-stakeholder community to make that legitimate and of value. And you get that by having very clear messages from the
Thank you,
events.
Grace. Yes.
Thanks.
So now I open the floor for an open discussion for everybody that is here and online. So I don't know if there is anyone questioning. Well, it's too early because I just opened the discussion, but our speakers, they were very brave because in 3 minutes they tried to cover some messages on so many complex issues. But I think that they trigger what is really at stake at the moment. And so let's see if we have some questions from you physically here and from the online world. Yes.
Hi,
So if you can present yourself.
Yes, I was
Very
just
briefly.
wondering if Nigel can hear, but he knows me well enough. Adam Peake, I worked for ICANN.
We know, we all know you quite well.
Also
but-
from ICANN. I wonder, hearing statements from the UN Secretary General recently, particularly around the Global Digital Compact, the terms being used are extremely negative. The harms that digital technologies are doing to the world, serious harms being done to our societies. I can quote at some length. Given what Chris just said about how the internet is bringing us through crisis, how we all rely upon it extensively for every aspect of our lives during the pandemic, is there an opportunity for Europe to change the tone of the debate, to opportunities, to successes, and of course acknowledging the harms that do exist, but the opportunities are in improved access, the next billion. We always talk about the next billion. We've been talking about the next billion since the IGF, and now we're at 5 billion, so we want 6 billion. How do we get people online? Of course, we have to accept there are harms that happen, but how do we emphasize the positive nature of the internet? The fact that we relied upon it. Where would we be without the internet after 2 years of pandemic? We would not be in this room. We would not be traveling. I'm not sure we'd have a society that was functioning. So it's very important to emphasize that this is a thing for good. Yes, we do have to accept there are damages and harms, address those, but capturing this debate in terms of damage is, well, it in itself is harmful. So I wondered if the panelists had any comment on that. What can Europe do?
Mm-hmm. Very good. Please go ahead and present yourself.
Yes, about Marcus, the General Coalition on Nuclear Damage and Safety. I want to reflect on what Chris said, is that yes, we have to get our messages as internet governance groups, whether it's EuroDIG or the IGF internationally. But I'm working in this field for quite some years, and then it's extremely hard to come up with a common message. So I think it's more relevant than ever, because 2 years from now, there will be the big debate whether the whole surface will continue. But how are we going to make sure that these messages are going to come out? And just make an excellent suggestion for Europe. But also talking global level. How do we make sure that all stakeholders agree on what message is going to come out? And I think that that's where it's been sort of stopped every time in the past almost 2 decades now. But we will have to come up with these messages, because otherwise we've got to show up to change. How do we organize ourselves to get these messages positive?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now I have Tanya. Please present yourself.
Hi everybody. Tatiana Tropina, Leiden University. I just wanted to second what Adam said. I was in Costa Rica 2 weeks ago, and it was actually quite astounding that people who should be talking about access, development, about good things and support multi-stakeholder model at the rights forum had all the conversation revolving on and on about the harms that internet brings to human rights defenders, to general public, the harm that AI brings on the top of the internet and everything. And I indeed agree with Adam, but I think that maybe I can propose a bit more of the way forward. In Europe, somehow, we talk a lot about governance. We talk about the beauty of the multi-stakeholder model. So we are very much focused on this. We are very much rehearsing this. And to what Val said, sometimes it feels to me that we are mostly preaching to convert it. Because the rest of the world might not be listening to us. And I think connecting these two, connecting the promise of global connectivity, the good things that the internet brings to the multi-stakeholder model of its governance might be the way to go, as one of the suggestions.
Thank you very much.
There has been a virtual hand, right?
Sorry?
A virtual hand, like someone on Zoom has.
So I'm going to the online speaker, please.
Oh, should I like unmute them?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
okay, yes, perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nigel, you may speak now.
Yes, sorry, yes, thank you. I just really wanted to respond to
Nigel, sorry, it's you. I was not aware, I'm not aware. It's not your time yet, sorry. I want to hear the public.
I'm sorry,
the participants. Sorry, Nigel.
I'll go away, it's all right.
So after, okay, just wait a second, because we are in the middle of the discussion now. And so we still have like 15 minutes of discussion, and then I will give the floor to our speakers. So, so we have these three. I start here, and then you, and then.
Thank you, Andrew Camping. Just picking up on something that Wolfgang said first, where you mentioned about the slight disconnect between the sort of discussion bodies and the decision-making bodies. As part of your comments, but the extra layer I throw in is there's also a complete separation between the governance bodies and the standards bodies, even though some of the decisions taken by some of the internet standards bodies have an impact which basically either enables or bypasses policies. So the fact there's a complete separation between those two, I think, is problematic. That needs to be thought about and addressed. And also observe that there's virtually zero involvement in the technical standards bodies, certainly by the European Commission for the United States, which is disappointing given that certainly the ITF meets in Europe every year, once a year, and it's embarrassing that the member states are almost not present all the time. That could usefully be addressed. And then just very briefly and finally, I think it's really positive that there's discussion at the moment about internet harms, because it's been ignored for too long. And we talk about the internet being a force for good. I think it's really, really important to recognise the harms, because otherwise they won't be addressed. So I think, yes, it's a force for good, but we need to acknowledge and deal with the harms as well, because it's a force for amplification of harms. That's becoming even more problematic.
Thank you. You please present yourself.
Yes, Roberto Gaetano, EuroDIG. I'm speaking from the point of view of the user view of the internet. I think that I wanted to link to what Adam Beek said, and without any doubt, there are internet is bringing great advantages, but also some potential harms, and I wonder whether it brings. Whether these advantages and harms are equally spread on the world's population, or whether there are some parts of the world population that are enjoying big advantages, for instance, ourselves, because we can run these conferences and so on, and whether the harms are concentrated on another part of the population that So in short, whether we shouldn't do an even bigger effort in order to bridge the digital divide. And yeah, that's basically it. When we talk about how the users are affected by the internet, we shouldn't forget that also came up in a session before in the previous hour, that we that are long-time internet people, we think about the internet as a traditional internet, whereas right now, social media, for instance, are the way that the new generation and the next billion is joining the internet. And so whether there's an unbalance between who uses the traditional internet and who is affected by the social media, where there's a much less of the spirit that brought the internet alive.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, you please, if you can present yourself, and then the participants that is in front of you.
Yeah.
But please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Again, here from British Foreign Affairs, where I lead some of the work on digital innovation. I was thinking, I mean, it's quite a complex discussion, of course. I mean, what is the GDC and how it relates to everything else that has been ongoing for the past 20 years since the inception of business. And I think, you know, looking at this long-term trajectory in a way, I think it's clear that we're in a point where something needs to be updated. You know, we all kind of realize that how business was kind of set up is not necessarily the best way to deal with these issues today. You know, you had only 1 billion people online in those days. You didn't have any of the sort of climate issues that are present today involved in the business discussions or agreements. You didn't have any of the platforms, you didn't have mobile internet really, you didn't have any of the human rights concerns related to emerging technology in 2003, 2005. So I think the process that started through the roadmap for digital cooperation that Secretary General set up, and now it's entering the second phase, I think it's kind of a way to, you know, develop some form of agile governance around these emerging issues and new issues that need to be. But I think now we need to also answer, how does it relate to everything else? Mm-hmm. You know, how do these processes merge? And here, you know, it's quite interesting to look at the policy brief issued by the Secretary General, and where it starts to look at the GDC as not only as a declaration of goals and principles, but as something you implement, and where you also create a structure around the digital cooperation forum. My question really is this the way to go about it, or should we rather revise some of the existing structures and sort of update them to meet these challenges? And then, you know, is the proposed forum also answering to some of the governance gaps that I think are quite crucial? Because in my view, the multi-stakeholder model for implementing the UN digital agenda has never really been institutionalized. Mm-hmm. It's been operationalized under the business process. It hasn't really, and you see it from the GDC process, mm-hmm. The stakeholders are listened to, but they're not part of the negotiation. The negotiation is still among the member states. Mm-hmm. So this is one issue. And the other issue I think that kind of needs to be dealt with is that the business process has been kind of disconnected with the human rights bodies and structures of the people. So it's unable to really link these issues together. And it's quite difficult to see how you deal with human rights concerns in the business framework. So something needs to also, I think, happen in that space as well. And you know, I think we should also start as a kind of multi-stakeholder community, start identifying this as a governance gap that we think need to somehow be dealt with, so that we can provide a kind of constructive approach to the discussion. But I mean, this is maybe a question to the panelists.
Yes, of course.
What do you see?
Very good. Thank you so much. Now I'll give the floor.
Thank you. My name is Gladys Kowalska. I'm from European Commission and Secretary General for International Partnerships, and also for GDC and relations to technology. With bidding the GDC process. actually my colleague, he already posed my question. I also wanted to talk about the recent policy brief of the United Nations General Secretary of June 5, and most likely you know about the plans to institutionalize process and to launch the Digital Cooperation Forum that would coordinate the GDC process, etc. And my question is also why? Because we have WSIS, we have IGF, and we have actually this forums program that do the job, but of course, much likely there is kind of wish to have permanent structure, right, for this, and there are many question marks to raise. But my point is that yes, Europe was actually involved, and as you may know, Europe did exceptional stuff actually during the process. We managed to have the common contribution of 27 member states for GDC, and that's something unusual, right? So all 27 member states agreed on this, but maybe I heard from the previous interventions that much like this whole community is not that much involved in the process. It's not most likely not all to solve the European contribution, right? And even though that's public. And I think that is also very important in this regard. Disregarding the fact that there are, let's say, aims from United Nations side or technical side to institutionalize the process of defense permanent structure, most likely what we place or in the complement IGF in this case. But it's important actually that we might still lead the process. Sweden and Rwanda are facilitating the issue paper. Germany and Namibia are facilitating the summit preparation. So I would say that Europe is involved, and the main thing is now negotiations that will start in January 2024, and we would have some of them 7-6 months for the negotiations. And I think this is the time where the stakeholder community has to be very, very active.
Okay.
And this is the point.
So we have 13 minutes now, and I will give the floor to our speakers for 10 minutes at least. No, I know. Just to make a point here that we still have Miriam and anyone else. And okay, so we have 2 interventions more, and then I'll give the floor to our speakers. Okay, so please present yourself and go ahead.
My name is Miriam Kühne. I am the chair of the RIDE community, and that's the underlying operators of the networks that actually made it possible that we could work through the pandemic, like Adam mentioned, and also during the war in Ukraine, for instance. So it seems to be this discrepancy sometimes when we talk about the internet, what we mean, governments and users talk about the internet, often maybe it's related to harm that's kind of on the top layer, and then when we talk about the internet and the underlying infrastructure, something else. So I don't really agree with that. The traditional internet, doesn't exist anymore, because if you look at the operators underneath, that spirit is still very much there. I mean, if you look at the way they've been coordinating and collaborating, for instance, during the pandemic, and also now helping each other out in Ukraine and in other areas in distress, this collaboration and coordination is very much alive. And despite most of these people are actually competitors with each other, but they realize that they have to work together. And that's from day one, and it's still happening. And often, I think we ignore this underlying spirit and this underlying technology, and the people who make it work are kind of ignored. We talk about the internet is creating all this harm and social media and users, and I agree with that. We need to invest it, but they're often like more social issues, kind of rather than actual technical issues.
Yes.
And I think we need to not forget that they're kind of 2 different issues. And I would like to ask, the panelists maybe, or suggest how we could maybe make use of it more of the underlying of this expertise also that's there in the technical community.
Very good. Thank you. And now our last participant. Yes.
And I'm actually one of the people that 20 years ago when I was not reading, so but in hindsight, I think that these new ideas of the proposals are fair, so I try to keep the current offer. At the same time, I'm increasingly worried by the fact that in our community, I think many of us are too self-indulgent. So we continue to claim that everything is by multi-stakeholder model is by definition the best possible one, that there are no harms, it doesn't say we need to change the tone of the conversation. But I would like to understand why this tone of the conversation. Because in fact, yes, it's true that the internet was vital during the pandemic to keep everything online and working, and it's adaptable. But I don't think we can claim that today as the success of the internet. I mean, that was the good thing, the bond that 2 years ago. Nowadays, that is given for granted. So the problem now is how do you deal with the additional things that comes on. And if I think of the success stories of the internet in Europe in the last 5 years, it's very hard to come up with any. So I can see many in the US, like the AI, like currency, I mean, there were lots of things, but in Europe, not much has been happening. And so it's understandable that this way of financial services. So we should really understand that there are parts of our community that are not that constructive. And I mean, if you go to the ITF, I just need to give an example. The ITF a couple of weeks ago was tasked with discussing whether they can meet in China. And the answer was, we don't know, but maybe no. Because China is, according to the US Department of State, is an unsafe country. And then there's no religious freedom. But if you compare like the violent death rates, I mean, the ITF made in Philadelphia, which is 40 times the range of king. So this is the least. I mean, how can we think that this is not seen as a value idea? Non-American, non-Western half of the world. It's still like that. So we should do something to also change the approach to these countries. And maybe this would downtown that start changing.
Okay, thank you very much. So now over to our speakers, and I think that there were, well, all the participants, they raised so very good points. So I know it's going to be difficult, but I will give you 3 minutes again to end this part of the part one of the session, and in the same order. So welcome, please.
Thank you. Let me start with the question of the definition. You know, because when the governments disagreed on the first phase on the World Summit, they had no clue what internet governance is, and they mandated the working group on internet governance to come up with a definition of internet governance. And I was a member of the EuroDIG, and we had discussed over length a narrow definition, names and numbers, or broad definition, including internet-related public policy issue. And we decided for a broad definition, taking into account that there are 2 layers which have to interact. That means the more technical layer and the policy layer. What I've seen instead is that regardless of this broad definition, we have still a very low level of interaction between code makers and lawmakers. Diplomacy and technology are sitting in different camps. When I was in the open-ended working groups discussing cybersecurity issues in the United Nations, 90% of the diplomats had no idea that the IGF exists, but they reinvented the wheel. But we have here a best practice forum on cybersecurity. So this is also governmental ignorance to a high degree, or arrogance, or whatsoever. So that means it's not a question of merging between technology and diplomacy. It's meeting, listening, hearing together. So the definition includes also the verb of sharing. So that means consultation, as many governments say, you know, is not sharing policy development. It's difficult if it comes to internet-related public policy issues, right to freedom of expression, privacy, you know, security. So, but you have to find a way how to involve stakeholders in their respective roles in a way that it moves forward, because we have this one world, one internet, and even if we have the one world, 193 jurisdictions, this is a reality that we have 7 states. But you know, this is an additional pressure to enhance the communication, not only the collaboration. And this brings me to the proposal with the Global Digital, the new forum, Digital Cooperation Forum. So my question is really, will this start a new definition battle? What is digital cooperation? What is internet governance? Internet governance include internet-related public policy issues. Will digital cooperation discuss issues which are not related to the internet? So this is a crazy proposal in my eyes. So that means, and if it comes to the institutionalization, so we have already built now with the IGF, you know, many quote unquote institutions. We have the dynamic coalition. Nations, best practice for the policy fora. So we have now the leadership panel. And this is now the challenge of the leadership panel, to bring the messages from the IGF to the negotiation bodies in the United Nations. That means if you create another implementation mechanism, the first question is who will pay for it? And the second question is, you open a senseless battle about definitions and competition between two different bodies. This is not the right way to go. Thank you. This has 3 minutes.
Nigel, now it's your turn.
Yes, thank you very much. And yeah, I'm sorry sorry for intervening earlier, and I couldn't hear all the comments from the floor. It's not easy being remote, but three main points from my point of view. First of all, to endorse what Wolfgang has said, and to also back up what Adam said, in that we need to be more positive. We need to look for what an incredible progress has been made in so many areas. Yes, I mean it's all very well for the Tech Envoy's report to point out all the the problems with content and the problems with disinformation, and that's all very relevant, and it does need to be tackled. But let's separate the architecture of the internet from what's on the internet. And the governance of the internet has been remarkably successful in that we have an architecture that stood the test of time through the pandemic. And during the pandemic, I mean, stakeholders came together. We didn't hear governments during the pandemic saying the operators are not stepping up to the plate, or the stakeholders are not stepping up to the plate. So this was a real test of the multi-stakeholder process that I think worked. So as we look forward to the Global Digital Compact and the WSIS review, let's try and be realistic about what has gone on, what progress has been made in international domain names, in the multilingualism of the internet. Incredible steps have been taken there. Yes, there's an awful lot more to do, and the Global Digital Compact should show the way on that. But we don't need to reinvent the process. We don't need a digital cooperation forum that's going to second guess the work that the IGF has done. So I think there's a lot to be positive about, and I'm very grateful for this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Chris?
Jumping in, okay. We talk a lot about the policy brief number 5 that came out about digital cooperation. I think it's interesting to look actually also at policy brief number 1 about our common agenda, which is entitled "To Think and Act for Future Generations." And I think the Dutch co-facilitating the development of a declaration in that regard. But I think, sort of speaking to what Adam was raising, I think one of the key things that we really do need to keep in mind and keep very central in this discussion is we need to protect the internet as a global infrastructure, a global sort of facilitator for future generations. And we are at a point now where there are risks to that global nature of the internet. And this discussion that we're having, while yes, being complicated by a huge range of other issues in regard to what goes on the internet and how the internet is used, we still need to focus on, but when we get to the other side of solving those problems, we need to have that global internet there that allows us to innovate, to develop, to work in new ways, but relying on that global infrastructure that we have there. Now, I think the other point I really wanted to respond to, I think the colleague from the Finnish MFA and from the Commission talking about the importance of having sort of a public policy and governments involved in these discussions, and that's absolutely true. I think we also need to look at what a multi-stakeholder approach actually means. I think there is a risk in the UN setting where we have said, okay, there is multi-stakeholder approach is important, and the IGF is a multi-stakeholder approach, and it's non-decision making. That doesn't mean that a multi-stakeholder approach cannot be decision making. It just means that the IGF is non-decisional. What we need to look at and make sure that in the UN process, we don't lose that possibility. Because I mean, I've been working at the coalface for 20 years of multi-stakeholder processes that actually make policy. And we have other good examples, the Net Mundial principles, the IANA stewardship transition, where a multi-stakeholder approach was adopted to actually enact policy, not just to have a discussion. We need to look at new models for doing that in the UN, and that might mean evolving parts of the IGF. It might mean sort of building new sort of structures within the IGF. It probably shouldn't mean just crafting new structures willy-nilly, because we know that there is a challenge in this proliferation of venues, proliferation of processes that doesn't actually make it easier to arrive at the necessary coordination. And that Andrew sort of noted the lack of coordination there can have really serious impacts. So finding new ways to enact that multi-stakeholder approach to achieve what we need to in the UN space is going to be the real challenge for the coming years.
Thank you so much. Noon 20:45, so we made it. So it's now. Thank you very much. It was a very good presentation. Thank you so much. Just in time, right?
Thank you. Indeed, that was excellent to conclude the first part on time, having covered so many important issues. It's a real challenge, as we all know, to navigate what's happening at this time with so many processes intersecting. And so at this halfway point, we want to look at really a decade ahead. What is potentially the vision that we, as European stakeholders here assembled at EuroDIG, want to see roll out following these processes of leading up to the Summit of the Future next year with the Global Digital Compact that we've been discussing. What's going to happen in terms of implementation of that, and how European stakeholders would like to see that implementation create a viable, innovation-friendly and open internet governance environment for stakeholders. And the WSIS plus 20, how do we see the vision of internet governance and digital cooperation following the WSIS plus 20 review, which, as has been touched on, will include a review of the Internet Governance Forum, its mandate, and potentially the outcome of the WSIS plus 20 instituting changes and reforms for the mandate, if it is indeed renewed. That's not guaranteed. We'll have to see how the negotiations and preparations for the WSIS plus 20 review proceed in that respect. But let's start to think ahead to the decade following both the Summit of the Future next year and the WSIS plus 20 review in 2025. And what are the implications for national and regional internet governance fora of changes that may result from these processes in the UN? What would the position of EuroDIG be, for example, in the new world following the WSIS plus 20 review, and with, as we expect, the Global Digital Compact having been agreed, launched and set in train in terms of actions and follow-up for landing and implementing the Global Digital Compact. So, as we've touched on already, there are potentially a lot of key changes that could happen, and nothing is clear yet exactly how those changes will be described and defined by the member states in the UN. And as has also been mentioned, the IGF has evolved in many ways since the first one in 2006. How will it continue to evolve following the renewal, we hope for, renewal of the mandate in 2025? So that's the sort of area of focus for the second part of this workshop. And we have, as before, some guiding questions for you to reflect on as you consider points that you wish to raise. The first guiding question what priorities should Europe seek for the GDC's implementation plan that, as has been commented, may include the proposed Digital Cooperation Forum that's described in the policy brief for the Secretary General's policy brief. So what priorities should Europe seek for that implementation phase? The second question, what do we expect the global IGF ecosystem, including the NRIs, to look like following the WSIS +20 review? That's the second question. And to bring all this closer to home, if you like, to this forum here in Tampere, what active role should EuroDIG seek in the implementation of the outcomes of the WSIS +20 review and indeed the Global Digital Compact? So those are the guiding questions to help focus the discussions in this second part with this look ahead to the decade following these processes in the UN. We have a panel and two members of the panel have joined us on at the front here. And we have three members of the panel participating online. So I'd like to start off with inviting Nele Liosk, who is Estonia's ambassador at large for digital affairs, who is online, to set the ball rolling with your thoughts, Nele, on the future evolution of the digital cooperation and internet governance system. So Nele, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. So if you can just raise a hand, because I'm in a very noisy lobby at the hotel where I could not get to the check-in. Okay, great.
We can hear you. Yeah.
Oh. Yeah. Thank you so much for organizing it and kicking it off. I would simply like to follow from what was discussed actually before and strengthen something that we believe are important for the future. And the first is actually related to the discussion around the risks and opportunities that these technologies bring. And it is indeed so that due to the cross-border use of technologies, several risks have been increasing and will increase in the future. But and it is definitely important to deal with some of the risks, and I will come to this in my second point. But we would still like to see that we see the role of technology still as an enabler and rather a big opportunity and a big risk, and that we also drive from our, let's say, actions, keeping this in mind. Because it seems to me that even when reading at the policy brief of the Digital Global Compact, even though the Digital Global Compact was born in order to emphasize on the opportunities and really think of ways how digital technologies could support achieving the aims of the Sustainable Development Goals, it's not really so. When we look at the policy brief, we see it extensively focusing on different risks and potential harms that the technologies can do. And coming from Estonia, where we have, in a way, found a balance between, let's say, regulating everything that can go bad, but we haven't regulated because things can go bad. We have regulated in order to enable the positive changes. Is it to support democracy? Is it support to better governance, different policy areas from health to education? And I think this is an important thing to keep in mind. But and this actually brings me to the governance issues, and we can see that some countries have been late with regulations. Some issues have been decided not to regulate all, and we can see some damaging results. For example, everything that is happening and not regulating, let's say, social media platforms and ignoring these questions for so many times. It really has ended in polarization and so forth. And it does cause harm to democracy, but also security, as we are currently seeing in the context of the Russian war against Ukraine. But what we have also seen, let's say, from Estonian side, is that actually this regulation is not enough. The regulation itself will not increase digitalization, let's say, will not increase trust in digitalization, will not increase the capacity, and may not at times also bring the desired impact, as we have seen now with the fight with disinformation. We have the DSA now in place, we have some other regulations in place, but how we but how whether this is actually going to make a big difference alone, I would doubt so. So actually we need a constant dialogue with those who are important, and these who are important may not necessarily be state actors only. These are also, and increasingly though, private companies, of course, big tech companies, but also individuals, as we have also seen from the war in Ukraine, in providing internet, for example. This also means that we have to keep in mind in governance two issues, and one of them was stressed by our colleagues from the Commission. The decision making needs to be a multi-stakeholder based and not just state-based, not only because we have the inclusive policy making, or we would like to be open and more transparent and inclusive in what we do, but actually because they also hold the power and oftentimes actually the capacity. It may not be that, it may happen that the capacity in all these areas may not lie in government organizations, nor in UN or other international organizations that are currently leading this process. And I would agree also with some of the criticism that it has not been perhaps that inclusive as inclusive as it should be, and we would definitely like to see this happening in the future. And the second is related to what we can actually regulate. We see EU regulating, some countries following EU, for example, in GDPR. But for example, when we look at AI Act negotiations already in the EU, where we have 27 member states, it has been quite exhaustive, and for two reasons. First, because also in the EU, we have different views. Some are supporting more innovation, some human rights, which of course are not mutually exclusive. But the other thing is also that we actually may not know what and how to regulate. And now when we come to, but it's clear that in some areas we do need global principles, not necessarily, of course, regulation. For example, when it comes to cross-border data flows, and here we have some initiatives, like the Japan has initiated data flows with trust. And what we can also see from there, that it tends to go still towards regional approaches as opposed to global. So I believe we have to really take a close view at what we can regulate and where really the risks are, in order not to cause harm and not to limit these opportunities for sustainable development goals. Okay, I believe I exceeded my 3 minutes. I apologize for this.
Well, you made some very important points about the relationship between policy setting, establishment of principles, adherence to principles, and where does regulation most importantly count in terms of proportionate interventions by regulators and national policymakers. So thank you very much for that. Next, you mentioned the Commission, and we have somebody representing the Commission on the panel who I'd like to invite to speak next, Esther Sanz, who I think is online as well. So Esther, please express your initial comments on the vision for the future. And I'm very mindful of the strong support that the Commission has shown for the Declaration for the Future of the Internet. And so perhaps, Esther, you could also comment on that in terms of how that's progressing, given you have over 70 signatory states, and how that initiative will intersect with what's happening in the UN that we've been discussing so far. So Esther, please, over to you. Thank you. Again, this is 3 minutes, I'm afraid, but see what you can do within that time frame. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor for me to be here. I hope you can hear me well. Mark, yeah, thanks for the reminder of the time. I'm gonna go straight to the points, if you allow me, with these 3 minutes, and then we can have a broader discussion. I think that the 3 questions that you put as framing the debate are very good, and they help us set the tone of this important conversation. The first question, so I will refer to them directly if you allow me. On the first question, role of this Digital Cooperation Forum, what do we expect about the GDC? The first thing that I need to say is that the EU is extremely involved in these processes. So we're taking great care to come up with sensitive positions on the GDC, on the WISES process, etc. We certainly need a sustainable digital cooperation architecture. We need to build it, all of us, but there are many pre-existing established fora to do that. So we have actually reservations regarding the proposal to create a new digital cooperation forum. In particular, if this is not structured following strict multi-stakeholder principles. It looks like supporting and strengthening established structures such as the IGF could avoid those applications and most especially avoid more fragmentation of efforts within the UN system. So here's my clear answer to question 1. On question 2, also extremely relevant, the first thing that we expect is that the architecture emerging from WISES plus 20 is multi-stakeholder. And this is not a given. This is something that we need to discuss in the multi-stakeholder environment as well. We have countries with a completely intellectual project around the internet and a completely different governance project. And those countries are very influential. They are managing to convince many of our partners in the G77, for example, in the Global South, that the multi-stakeholder model is not a good one anymore. So we need to work actively towards securing a multi-stakeholder model. And one way of doing it is improving it. Is making it more inclusive and making it with more capacity to deliver. On the third question, of course, EuroDIG and all the pre-existing multi-stakeholder platforms have to have a very strong role in the implementation of the WISES and the GDC, but also at the level of the negotiations. How these negotiations are being prepared, but also how the negotiations are being conducted and how the final product would need to be implemented. And here, we need to innovate. We need to think about mechanisms where the EuroDIG community can pass those messages and participate, perhaps in a federated structure with the IGF into those processes. These are the straight answers from the Commission on these three very important questions. I'm happy to very briefly report on the evolution of the Declaration for the Future of the Internet. You've heard us talking before about how proud and committed we are about the DFI. No, before the DFI, there was the Declaration of Digital Rights and Principles of the EU. It's a declaration that was consulted with stakeholders, went through a long process of discussions. The DFI is somehow, and that's how we see it, it's a broader project, but that's how we see it. It's kind of an international simplification of that EU declaration. That's why we are so proud of it. That's why it was relatively easy for us to go and negotiate that text, because it's really based on what we think about digital projects in the EU. And you've also heard us talking about how important it is to involve the multi-stakeholder community in the DFI process. And here we've launched last year a high-level event in Prague with a series of multi-stakeholder workshops that produce very concrete main messages reports in relation to commitments, that brought into these discussions countries, civil society, private sector. We spoke about it in the IGF 2022. We saw all these processes a little bit as a test about what ideas we could put on the table to further engage the multi-stakeholder community. And this test went very well. And we are in the process of reflecting about how we can actually empower very substantially, very ambitiously, this program to engage the multi-stakeholder community in the DFI. I'm sorry not to be able to tell you right now how this program is going to look like in the future, because we are in the process of discussing internally, of gathering also the financial resources to make it real. But in the IGF 2023 in Kyoto, we will have several sessions on the DFI where we will put forward concrete ideas on how we are going to engage the multi-stakeholder community further in the DFI. This will involve for sure more workshops at the international level, but also things like, for example, mapping policies that signatories of the DFI are carrying out that map directly with some of the commitments that are put forward in the DFI. So there's a lot coming on the DFI, multi-stakeholder, more in the IGF 23.
Okay, thank you very much, Estef. And well, we look forward very much to hearing further about the next steps for introducing more opportunities for stakeholder engagement in the DFI process, and indeed the sessions in Kyoto, I'm sure will be very informative. And seeing how those the work ahead for the DFI connect with what's happening directly in the UN processes will be very interesting to see. Okay, let's now invite one of our panelists here in Tampere to comment from the technical community perspective. And so I look to Sébastien Bachelet to help us with explaining some of the vision that the technical community can offer. Sébastien is chair of EuroDIG, which is ICANN's at-large community for internet users in the European region. So Sébastien, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, before giving my remarks, I am not talking on behalf of the technical community. I am an end user. I participate to different bodies. I am here representing Internet Society France, who is a member of EuroDIG, and I am chair of EuroDIG, and representing ISAC France also in the board of AFNIC. But it's not because I am participating to technical bodies or so-called technical bodies, because I can argue about the fact that ICANN it's not just a technical body. I am not talking on behalf of, you have people whose better knowledge about technical community here than me. I am talking with the voice of end user, and only that voice. It's important for me. Multi-stakeholder governance need to serve not only to advance freedom of expression and human rights online generally, but a lot of other needs for end user all around the world, like easy and affordable access to internet, ability to participate to the evolution of internet and its governance. How can Internet Governance Forum evolve? That's one of the questions. But the first question is, who must be in charge of evolving the IGF? It must be a multi-stakeholder discussion and not only an intergovernmental gathering, even if it's in the UN General Assembly. Therefore, I consider that it must be the task of the global IGF itself. Now, what could be some possible improvement of the IGF ecosystem? The IGF ecosystem is not only the global meeting. And it's not the global IGF, it's not the global IGF, including the NRI. It's the ecosystem which includes the NRI, but not the IGF global. Therefore, it's also the national IGF, regional and sub-regional IGF, and various language, various theme, and of course, the dynamic coalitions and some other bodies. It is important to focus on IGF network and not only on the global IGF. In France, for the national IGF, we try to privilege some good relationship within the local community as well, or including the government. It's allow for impactful discussion and policy. It's also interesting that intersessional work, such as dynamic coalition, best practice forum, and policy network, and plenty of local workshop. In terms of evolution, I would like to make some proposal. At the national level, we can imagine having the CCTLD, the security body, the government representatives, the body in charge of regulation, then you have the voice, both from businesses and individual voice coming together. It's already the case in various countries. But they can come to give feedback on what they were doing the last year and explain the topic to be taken care during the next year. It can allow better coordination between all those organizations. It's what we try to do in France. And it could really improve the value of the IGS as a whole. I don't know how many times, I guess I am already out of my 3 minutes. Therefore, I would like to add the same type of thing at the regional level and at the global level. It's important to gather the people who are really, or the organization who are doing the work on internet, about internet, to have their voice. It could be very useful at the European level to know what is happening, what they are doing, each and every one of them, and to coordinate that. It could be a very good improvement of that. And we can have also a report at each level for those meetings, and that's done, what it's done in other part of IGF network. My last words on behalf of EuroDIG, multi-stakeholder is a must. And individual end user need support to participate meaningfully at this IGF network. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian, for emphasizing those points on multi-stakeholder engagement, including the internet users worldwide, indeed. Thank you very much for presenting that perspective. It's very, very useful for us. Next, I'd like to invite David Passarelli, who's joining us online. David is from the UN University Center for Policy Research. I was particularly pleased that David is able to join us at a very ungodly hour for you, no doubt. So really appreciate it, because there is another strand of inputs going into the UN process. This is the UN High-Level Board on Effective Multilateralism, HLAB, as we have come to know it. And its report, which included recommendations on digital and data governance, which no doubt some of you attending this workshop have looked at. And that indeed includes another proposal for an entity of opportunity for stakeholders to engage. It's a proposal. It's called the Global Commission on Just and Sustainable Digitalization. So, David, I really appreciate your explaining a little bit about how that proposal by the Independent Committee, HLAB, fits into what's happening now in the GDC and crossing over, intersecting with WSIS +20, no doubt, in 2025, how that fits in. And if it's adopted, what would that mean for European stakeholders in the coming years? So David, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to this event. You may have seen me sipping coffee in the background. It is because it is quite early here in New York. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'll be short. I've attended the first session, so I know that you're keeping to time, and I'll try to stay within my 3 minutes. And just also say hello to my colleague, Amandeep Gill, the SG's Envoy for Technology, who I see has joined the call this morning. I am the director of the UNU Center for Policy Research. I led the secretariat for the High-Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism. And I'd like to start perhaps by the end of the report on page 62, which includes the terms of reference of this board. And I think it's important for everyone to understand how this board fits into this landscape. The board was an independent board, a very diverse board, perhaps one of the most diverse high-level panels assembled by the Secretary General. And its task was to identify areas of common interest where governance improvements are most needed, and then to propose options on how this could be achieved. Importantly, the board was meant to take into account existing institutional and legal arrangements, as well as gaps and emerging priorities. In short, the Secretary General asked the board to identify gaps, provide bold, independent, and forward-looking solutions. The work unfolded over roughly a year. We had 20 workshops, quite a number of expert inputs, something like 400 experts joined those workshops. We consulted the United Nations system. It was quite a robust consultation process along the way. Now, my intervention today comes exactly 2 months after the report was handed over to the Secretary General, and only a few days after the Secretary General has released his own policy brief on the Global Digital Compact. And I think my first headline message to this group is there is quite a bit of synergy between these two documents. Indeed, the Global Digital Compact policy brief references in multiple places the work and the recommendations of the high-level advisory board. So the two reports are complementary. And in that way, we hope that they help member states in this process of negotiation and reflection about digital governance. The reports are aligned in their diagnosis of the challenges, the risks, the gaps, but also the opportunities today and on the horizon, and call for both of them renewed investments in multilateral and multi-stakeholder approaches. I think you'll find that common thread across both reports. You'll find very specific endorsements of certain ideas. For example, both reports call for the investment in new capacities, particularly in the legal system, to address challenges around data sharing and new technologies, strong emphasis on multi-stakeholder cooperation that prioritizes convergence around certain principles over uniformity. And you see this explicitly in the section on data governance. Because so many people have emphasized this morning in the prior session, the fact that the Summit of the Future, the Global Digital Compact, focuses a lot on risks. I should say that, we open the chapter talking about opportunity, that smart investments in digital development can really generate significant returns for communities, economies, and societies, while simultaneously, and this was quite important, addressing global inequalities and injustices. Now, the report has several governance innovations, but there's one specifically linked to WSIS Plus 20. And that is that the report calls for the establishment of a global commission on just and sustainable digitalization, Mark, as you outlined in your opening remarks. It envisages several competencies for this particular board. It envisages a global commission as a body that can, for example, generate globally vetted and endorsed data and insights on risks and opportunities in a rapidly changing landscape. And here we've referenced the work of the IPCC. It would be impossible to think of the UN Convention on Climate Change and the important work that's done at the intergovernmental level without the robust knowledge base that is produced by the IPCC. And so we think that this commission can have this knowledge function and produce the kind of data and insights necessary to drive political agreement. We believe it can be a forum to discuss principles and norms, perhaps around data governance, which is a topic that we address at some length in the report. Now, what the report does not say is who should lead, who should be excluded, and what specific roles members should take. What we do say is that the Global Commission, whatever its ultimate form, so we leave open the question of what it will eventually look like in its final form, it should enable collective problem solving. A speaker this morning made the point that in the current landscape, we have a multi-stakeholder approach that's been operationalized, but not institutionalized. And perhaps this is the space, the fertile ground necessary to try to institutionalize these multi-stakeholder approaches. So what do we call for specifically in the current timeline? We called for the establishment of a multi-stakeholder task force responsible for developing terms of reference for the Global Commission, leaving open, again, roles and responsibilities, and the final form and shape of this global commission. It's an opportunity to shape a new space. It's an opportunity to consolidate existing efforts, to bring coherence to this landscape. It is not meant to create one more institution that further fragments the landscape. And I know that has been a theme this morning at the meeting. And we have examples of this. We have colleagues this morning who've discussed the working group on internet governance, for example, a multi-stakeholder approach that ended up setting important principles on coordination for the digital environment. Now, in terms of member states, it's important to note that the report was launched on the 18th of April. Member states considered it 9 days later. And so it's a 72 report that they had 9 days to digest. That wasn't a lot of time to take on or take in the recommendations of the report. We were delighted, of course, to see the Secretary General endorse so many of the recommendations. And already at the end of April, we had a few member states that came out and stated that this was a useful approach to think about governance in this space. Portugal, Singapore, Mexico all came out favorably disposed to discussing the idea of a global commission, but nearly all member states also said it was quite early in the process to be able to provide reflections and positions on this specific recommendation. So like all of you, we are looking forward to the briefing paper that comes from the co-facilitators of the GDC later this summer, and we certainly hope that this idea will factor into that paper and the discussions that follow this fall. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you very much, David. That's very useful description of the context and indeed the next steps and process. And actually, on the next steps, with regard to the multi-stakeholder task force that you mentioned as being set up at some point to develop the terms of reference of the Global Commission. When do you expect that process to establish the multi-stakeholder task force to start? And would there be opportunities for stakeholders to contribute to that step?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question, Mark. I think, well, first, it's a member state decision. The Global Digital Compact is something that member states will need to negotiate. And in terms of creating opportunities for other stakeholders to shape it, I think that is the call that needs to be made now. So we heard earlier today someone say that, we need this multi-stakeholder community to remain engaged in the GDC process, in the lead up to the development of this paper. Now, while it is a complicated moment ahead of the SDG summit, many member states are focused on a different summit entirely. It is important, I think, if there is an expression of interest, if there is support for this idea, to make those voices heard as member states begin the process of thinking through what might go into the GDC. But it's member states that will have to decide to take up the call for a global commission and to take that first step of sanctioning a working group to work out the terms of reference. So we hope to see many champions come out in favor of this, but now would be the time leading up to the issues brief, of course, in the summer, and then continuing into the fall as member states take up that issues brief.
Okay, David, thanks very much. That timing factor is very clear. Thanks for relaying that to us. Okay, I know I'm falling behind in the timing here with so much very useful information coming through from our panelists, but we can't look ahead to the future without hearing the voice of young stakeholders. And of course, EuroDIG is the key forum for young people to engage and contribute to the discussions on all these issues. And I'm very glad to say that we've got Claudia Leopardi here up front, here in the room, to provide that voice for young people. So over to you, Claudia, please.
So thank you very much, Mark and Anna, for having me here. Yes, I'm Claudia Leopardi. I am part of EuroDIG this year. And today I don't want to bring only my perspective, but I had very nice and intense conversations with some fellow youngsters in the past few days. And yeah, so many things to say, so little time. So following the questions that were posted on the wiki, and really good questions indeed, The first one about the EU priorities for the GDC implementation. The GDC should indeed be an inclusive process through multi-stakeholderism. That's the main point to bring from that. And for example, the sounding board mentioned by Chris earlier could be a good proposal and to allow that. The Digital Cooperation Forum should probably not be the only option because it's not super multi-stakeholder, it's a bit more multilateral. This creation of additional fora could be a bit of a threat to allow fragmentation at the governance level. So that's something that we should probably take into consideration. Moving on to the second question about the IGF system. How would that look like? Well, everything, if the little time that I've spent in internet governance has taught me something, everything is so dynamic and changing here, and evolution and process are indeed good. But some institutions should remain stable reference points to host conversation and allow coordination. So future of the IGF. In brief, the IGF is one of the fundamental fora that should be preserved and strengthened, as Wolfgang earlier mentioned. Regarding the WSIS plus 20, this is the last point. EuroDIG should advocate through its means to keep improving the open and multi-stakeholder system that was talked about in the original WSIS and was strengthened in the WSIS plus 10 in 2015. And this is all because involving different sectors is not merely valuable, but necessary for the future of the internet. And these are the main ideas that came out from the several conversations that I've had.
Okay, Claudia, thank you very much. And that's very useful to know that you're having very important focused discussions on these issues of the look ahead, as you and your generation will inherit what the decisions that are going to be made in the near future. So, okay, well, we've got time, I think, for about 3 minutes worth of contributions from the floor. So I don't know, shall I invite somebody, check if somebody's online would like to say something before we turn to Amandeep?
Yeah, there is one hand raised on the Zoom. Should I?
Please, yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Amali De Silva Mitchell, and I'm from the Dynamic Coalition on Data-Driven Health Technologies. So as you can understand, keep it very short. We're particularly interested in the impact of the medical Internet of Things for the general user. And I just want to say that I think values, there should be a framework for values that is set up, especially based on harms and so forth, not, that support the principles. And I would like to see that going forward, please. And we are obviously very interested in ethics and the data quality and absolutely the algorithm qualities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amali. Thank you. That's very informative. I look around the room to see if any hands are raised. No, I guess everybody's keen to go to lunch, maybe. Okay. Anybody else online? No. Okay. All right. At this point, we'll move into the concluding part of the workshop. Just 5 to 7 minutes, maybe. But we're very pleased to have Amandeep Singhil, the tech envoy, who's been following a lot of our discussions today, to be able to comment and express his views on his reactions to what he's heard today. So Amandeep, please join us, and we look forward to hearing your reflections on our discussions here today.
And we don't have conclusion words. Okay, that's
okay.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to participate. I'm glad to follow David I guess you're in New York as well, David. Early morning and afternoon to everyone in Europe. I have listened very carefully to the discussion over the past half an hour, and I've been in touch with many of you over the past 8-9 months. And I want to begin by just saying how important your forum is and its sister forums are around the world. It's so pleasing to see the expansion in the footprint of the IGF through regional, national forums. The SIDS Internet Governance Forum started work recently. And when we got together in Addis Ababa, this dynamism, this diversity was very much a display. I heard about threats and opportunities and risks and so on. If I look back, this kind of a discussion, concern has happened just in recent memory when the high-level panel on digital cooperation was set up. Oh, what's it going to do? What does it mean for the IGF? And in the end, if we look back, the focus on the IGF plus digital cooperation model, the setting up of the leadership panel, all these other developments, if we look back, I think the IGF has been strengthened. The regional aspects, the national aspects of internet governance have been strengthened. And if you look at the Secretary General's policy brief into the GDC process, and I want to quote here, he says, internet governance objectives and actions would continue to be supported by the Internet Governance Forum and relevant multi-stakeholder bodies. And the recently established Internet Governance Forum Leadership Panel, in accordance with its mandate to enhance the impact of these bodies, could share Internet Governance Forum outputs, leveraging relevant expertise from the forum's multi-stakeholder advisory group. So even going forward, there is an emphasis from the Secretary General on strengthening the IGF and its ecosystem and giving it greater prominence in discussions around digital cooperation. So that's the first point I want to make. The second one is that we have a process today, and that's co-facilitated by Rwanda and Sweden. I would say they have shown exemplary leadership. They've been very open, very transparent, inclusive in terms of the consultations. The first phase has come to a conclusion. This included wide listening with all stakeholders, and then 8 deep dives in which, again, all stakeholders participated. And even in terms of, speaking arrangements, etc., there was an attempt to really give it a very different, more of a multi-stakeholder flavor. And we've been supporting that process from the Secretariat, also with this open call on inputs into the Global Digital Compact. And it's a delight to see that more than 6,000 entities have contributed there, including the private sector, civil society, academia, individuals, the technical community. And there is a rough and ready analysis in terms of where these inputs are coming from, what are the themes, etc. And there are some high quality inputs. So I would recommend that the IGF community takes a look at the website, goes through some of this. We'll be doing more analysis as we need some time for that. And this becomes a resource in terms of capturing the current thinking on the different concerns that we have. So again, I would urge the community, the IGF community, to continue to participate. The IGF leadership panel has submitted an input. It has submitted some suggestions, ideas. The Addis Ababa discussion, the 5 themes were directly relevant to what is being considered in the GDC process, and that's likely to continue. So I want to underline the close link, the very intimate, very powerful, substantive link between the IGF ecosystem and this process. And it's my duty to support the co-facilitators and support this inclusive and open participation, even as we go into more of an intense negotiation phase next year. And as you would have heard the Secretary General say it repeatedly in his speech in August last year, for instance, for him, either this process is multi-stakeholder or it is not. And that point has also been underlined quite clearly in the policy brief. Then two more points, and I want to conclude there. One is David spoke about the HLab recommendations. I see a lot of complementarity between what the HLab has said. I mean, of course, it's an independent, autonomous input on the overall our common agenda, not just digital. But in the policy brief, the Secretary General has picked up on many of the themes around the growing inequalities, the governance gap, the need to move to urgent action on data, the need to look at emerging technologies and their governance from more of a comprehensive angle, AI in particular. So you see many of those themes being picked up. And David mentioned, he was asked about this global commission. I see Nigel's comments in the chat. I think what we have today is a set of options. And these options are allowing us, let's not jump to a conclusion on any one of those options, because there's a process underway. We need to kind of digest, we need to debate these things. The debate hasn't happened yet. So let's not jump to a conclusion. Essentially, what we are saying is that there is concern about some of the gaps, some of the irregularity in policy discussions, some of the inefficiencies in agenda creation, some of the overlaps between technical standard setting and policy issues. And there is also, from my perspective, a concern that, if you overload the internet governance function with more political issues, then, you kind of unravel or risk unraveling some of the kind of, achievements we've had with multi-stakeholder governance of the internet. So, there is wisdom needed in how we bring different things together without duplication. And on 5th June, the Secretary General underlined this idea is not to duplicate, the idea is to bring things together in a way that addresses those gaps. And, I would leave you to look at, the last section of his policy brief on the this idea of a regular assessment of the implementation of the compact to keep pace with technology developments. And the one thing that I want to underline again is that, especially referring to the previous remarks in this panel, that this is a multi-stakeholder forum. So the preparation, tripartite, those words are clearly used across civil society, which includes all the actors from the technical community, academia, and the value of independent scientific expertise, particularly around AI, that is clearly understood today. There's the private sector and there is governments. And even in terms of the implementation of the GDC, there's a very clear message in the Secretary General's policy brief that this has to be endorsed by other stakeholders as well. It is an instrumentality that's available to all stakeholders to commit to and to pursue collectively. So I see this more often as an opportunity to strengthen multi-stakeholder processes in a live way and bring it to places where it has not been so strong. The policy debates in New York, there is a kind of sometimes, there is a kind of, let's say, ritualism around multi-stakeholder approaches, not substantive enough, not deep enough. So I think there's an opportunity to do that. But all things considered, options need to kind of look at these. The advisory body on AI governance, so IPCC was mentioned. There are different options. Some people talk of an International Atomic Energy Agency type of an approach. Others talk about an ICAO type of an approach. But you look at, the leading AI economies today saying we need to get governance right, and we need to get this right through international collaboration. So whatever form this takes, I think the debate has started, and it is important for us to be inside the debate at the kind of evolving edge of this debate. Similarly, on human rights, accountability of both governments and the private sector for online harms. The debate has been engaged. We have existing forums and we can say, oh, they're doing great. Business and Human Rights Forum, it has a lot of strengths. There are other areas, RightsCon meets regularly, etc. But how can we do better? I think look at the intention behind all of this, the work of the Edge Lab, the discussions in the context of the GDC. What's the intention? The intention is, how can we do better? Because there is, frankly, a view out there in the public, among governments, among civil society actors, and I spend a lot of time with friends from civil society, that we have a problem. We have a problem, we have these gaps, and it's our responsibility to think wisely, collaboratively about those, and then co-create the responses. And I'm confident, given the past couple of years, 3 years in which we've been working these issues, that we can get this right. And this level of comfort issues, that's changes like that. It happens. But if we hold our hands, we work together, then we can get to where we want to be. Thank you so much.
Well, I would like to thank Ambassador Bill. Thank you very much for your final comments to this debate that actually started at 5 a.m. in New York. So I would like to thank David Passarelli as well, because he was there since 5 a.m. in New York. Thank you very much. And now just to wrap up, and not forgetting my hat as CSTD chair, so the chair of the Commission on Science and Technology for Development, which is a body from UNCTAD, and it is monitoring on an annual basis the WSIS. And now we are discussing the WSIS plus 20. And of course, we are very involved in the Global Digital Compact discussions, and looking forward for a very good debate on the WSIS plus 20. And I just would like to wrap up with some comments with what I perceived from the part one of this session. And Mark then will mention some comments on the part two. Sorry. So to sum up, there is a lot to improve. IGF has no mandate to adopt anything, but to put together the different stakeholders to discuss. There is a need for WSIS to evolve with, for example, new action lines, and the GDC can bring that evolution to call the attention to the themes that deserve special attention, namely with the United Nations Global Agenda, our common agenda. The EU legislation has to better reflect the multi-stakeholder discussions. The legitimation of the Global Digital Compact will come a lot from the involvement of the different stakeholders in the different phases of its discussion. The pandemic and the war in Ukraine demonstrated the importance of a non-fragmented, open and secure internet. The need in the current international framework, international framework, to emphasize the positive side of the internet, and European legislation has to have this into account and not to treat it as a bad thing and always as a risk. Besides all these multi-stakeholder approaches, governments and European member states continue to work not in complementary ways, but separately from the other stakeholders. The importance to address the connectivity and the digital divide, and to understand how to work and handle the classic internet with social media, bearing in mind the different generations that are now users of the internet. As it was said, our common agenda is to keep internet for the future generations. There are perhaps nowadays more social issues than technical issues to deal with. IGF operationalize but does not institutionalize. Digital Cooperation Forum may bring some problems with concepts. Are we talking about new things not related to the internet? There is a great challenge for the IGF leadership panel to bridge to discuss this. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Anna. And well, first of all, I have to say it's been such a great workshop. It's been a very rich and informative session, and I wish we could have had more interactive discussion, but I thought we had to hear a lot about what's going on and what the opportunities that should be coming around the corner for stakeholders in Europe to engage in the processes, and be it the next phases of the GDC process, which will be largely negotiated by the member states, but will there be opportunities for stakeholders to continue to engage? And we heard very much a positive opportunity being laid before us by Amandeep and indeed David Pasquale with his review of progress with the HLAB initiative report and recommendations from the HLAB. So we've covered a lot of ground in part two. I mean, Chris Buckridge said, well, part of the challenge is determining what kind of a vision do we have for the next 10 years. How do we help define the approach that the UN and the diverse global community of stakeholders are going to work together on? How do we help define that? Well, we've demonstrated, I think, through this workshop that there's a lot of thinking going on, and there's a lot of keen ambition to engage. I think that's my main conclusion, really, from part two, in terms of the look ahead, who should be involved, where the focus of that involvement should be. I think it's starting to become much clearer. Let's look forward to those opportunities to be confirmed, be it through sessions at the Global IGF in Kyoto, or indeed sessions created through the co-facilitators of the processes in New York. Let's hope and look forward to it and continue to push for increasing that scale of engagement, so that all the voices of internet users, as Sebastian so eloquently described, of the young people from the Youth IGF that Claudia was speaking for here, as well as civil society in general, and business and governments. And thank you very much to Nigel, indeed, for joining us today, despite the stresses of difficult travel. It's much appreciated. And Esther, thank you very much for the updates on the Declaration for the Future of the Internet, and how that will open up to much more stakeholder engagement. I think we all support that. So those are my concluding comments. We'll try and summarize this in more comprehensively following this workshop, and then we'll publish our main conclusions and forward that to the co-facilitators, to Amandeep and his team, to David, and in New York, as well as on the EuroDIG website. So I think I conclude with those points. It's a fast-moving area. It's quite complicated. A lot of stuff going on from different directions, but there is an apparent convergence and complementarity that was mentioned earlier, and hopefully we can navigate this and contribute from the platform of EuroDIG to articulating a European vision, which takes into account all the sectoral and community interests. So I'll close there with a big thank you. I'm sorry that we did run over time, and that was mainly my fault. Thank you, everybody who's attended here and everybody online. Thank you.